which is the reason you're here, because you have such thought-provoking and interesting ideas about education. We have your books in the Tampere Library, and for our graduates, I also know they can get hold of those from the publisher. That's right. So I'm going to hand over to Jon and his talk on generative AI. Jon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and it's lovely to see you. I hope that all is well and wonderful. And I hope that all is well and wonderful for all of you. Thank you so much for turning up from wherever you were turning up from. I believe that we have somewhere we have a group of people. Is that right? That some people in a classroom somewhere, a physical space, which is a very new thing to me because I have. There you all are. Hey, excellent. I have to be careful when I do this. Oh no, I did it. It did it. It's I've got this camera that follows me around, and so if I wave my hands in the air, weird things can happen. It will suddenly zoom in on me, or something very unexpected. I believe that might be what happened just now. Anyway, yes, I'm going to talk about generative AI. And I wouldn't call myself an expert on the subject. I think I wrote my first expert system about 35 years ago, and I sort of vaguely dabbled in artificial intelligence since. And in fact, for my PhD, I wrote a system that I didn't think was AI. I thought that it was to do with the collective intelligence of human beings and just using computers to connect them together. But in retrospect, it pretty much was, I guess. And I've suddenly found myself commentating about such things because I'm sort of worried about AI. So what I'm going to talk, what I'm going to talk about, well, I say ChatGPT Plus played quite a significant role in producing what you are about to see on the screen in front of you, if I ever remember to share my screen. Which is hopefully what is going to happen any second now. Yeah, this is produced with the help of ChatGPT Plus, and I thought I really ought to give it some kind of recognition for the work that it's put into this. It was because it was several minutes of work that it put into something which took me a little while longer. And I'm going to talk about educational ends and means, McNamara's fallacy, and the coming robot apocalypse. This is really about it's notionally about generative AI, but I hope that you will see by the end of this conversation, and do feel free to interrupt me at any point, and I am vaguely watching the chat, so I sort of hopefully I'll see when something happens, and there will be at least 2 interactive moments. Whoa. And hopefully you'll see by the end of this that actually it's not so much about generative AI as it is about education, why we do it, and how we should do it. And what I'm going to come up with at the end is some very bland and obvious things about how we'll deal with issues that may arise, or that I fear could arise, or that there is a risk could arise from generative AI. But they're all things that we almost all things that we kind of should be doing anyway. So that's where I'm aiming. There is a direction to all of this. There's a direction where we'll go deep into the depths of hell and look at the possibilities of what nasty things might happen with generative AI, and we'll come out the other side again. In order to reach that point, we will go via a certain amount of theory that comes from the book that I just held up, How Education Works, Teaching Technology and Technique, which Mark has recommended. So you know what that is. Okay, things I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about any of the obvious stuff. I'm not going to be talking about how ChatGPT hallucinates, or any of the others for that matter. I'm not going to be talking about student cheating, or I'm not going to be talking about the terrible ways in which the things are trained, or the ways in which creators are exploited in the harvesting of their data, or the horrendous environmental impacts involved in the training process, at least, of some of the larger generative AIs. And I'm not really going to talk about the AI apocalypse, although apocalypses come into this, and I think that's what there's something much more worrying than the being killed by artificial intelligences. I think it's dying a slow and rather boring death. It's the world ending not with a bang but a whimper. So that's none of this is going to be of any significance whatsoever. I'm going to ask, I'm going to give a little bit of my background, and I actually asked ChatGPT Plus to tell me about that, about me, and that is who I am. I'm sure you can read that for yourself, because it is only 50 words. But Athabasca University is Canada's open university. We teach fully online, and I live 1,000 kilometers away from Athabasca. Thank goodness, because it was -47 a couple of days ago. Also, it's really a very tiny place in the middle of nowhere, which some people love, but I don't. So most of the faculty are distributed, and I've been teaching there for and researching there for the last nearly 17 years, prior to which I came out from the UK. And I came out there because Athabasca's got some really amazing people still. It had some even more amazing people when I first arrived. I obviously scared them away. But that kind of thing is fairly boring. So I also asked ChatGPT Plus to write a haiku about me, which I rather like. Athabasca's guide, Dron teaches, tech intertwines, education's new tide. I mean, how charming is that? I think that's kind of what I'm aiming to do. So, and sort of what I do vaguely. Anyway, whilst we're on the subject of things that ChatGPT Plus has written, this is ChatGPT Plus's explanation of the McNamara fallacy. Now, Robert McNamara is famously didn't really think that anything was real unless you could measure it, and the name McNamara's fallacy actually came about because of the 2 months he spent as the president or chief or whatever it is of the Ford Motor Company in the 1950s. But much more famously, in the 1960s, he was the US Secretary of Defense throughout the bulk of the Vietnam War. And the America's loss of the Vietnam War is sometimes blamed entirely on Robert McNamara, because he took this idea of quantitative methods of managing warfare to rather ludicrous extremes. So for it was whether America was winning was measured solely in body count. At least to start with. Later, they introduced a few other measures, but this is it's something where the fallacy is to measure what can easily be measured, and then to ignore things that cannot be measured, and then finally to deny that they exist because you can't measure them. And it's related to Goodhart's law, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. But there's more to it than that. I have found McNamara's fallacy to be a fascinating way of looking at our systems of education for quite some time now. And it's going to be significant in what happens later on. So just remember this man, Robert McNamara. You will see him again. And I said I'm going to lead through a little bit of theory behind why I'm worried about ChatGPT Plus. This isn't just it isn't just me being an old fogey and having some kind of nostalgia for days gone by. This is actually there's a reason for why I think we run great risks in ways we might use generative AIs in education. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to talk about education as a technology, and to understand what I mean by that, it's important to understand what I mean by technology. And I take my definition from W. Brian Arthur, who's the nature technology, the nature of technology, what it is and how it evolves. Wonderful book, 2008 or 9, I believe. It talked about technology as being the orchestration of phenomena to our use. Now, I've rephrased that as basically it's about organizing stuff to do stuff. This is essentially what it's all about. And the stuff can be literally any stuff. It can be ideas, it can be musical notes, it can be pens and papers, it can be letters in words, it can be words themselves. Language is, of course, the archetypal technology in many, many ways. And it doesn't have to be true. There are technologies of prayer, for example. And thank you, Mark, for putting the link to the book in. It's a great book. It really, it kind of set me off on probably about 10 or 15 years of research. So technology can be stuff, any stuff. And really importantly, the stuff that can include, and almost always does include, other technologies. There are very few such things as standalone technologies. Almost all of the ones that we do are assembled with other technologies in order to become a different technology. So we have this notion as, for example, if I've got a notebook and this rather fetching Muji fountain pen, then the number of technologies that simply go into the pen are fairly phenomenal. Everything from metallurgy to chemistry of ink and metal turning stuff. And then, of course, I'm doing some writing or scribbling. In this case, I'm not actually writing anything on paper, which is another major technology. But really, quite importantly, there's grammar, there's syntax, there's all of the words, there's the spellings, there's the ways in which I hold the pen in order to write stuff. Technologies are all very much like this. They consist of and in relation to countless other technologies. It's a web. And they consist of us. We are part technology. If I don't say anything for a minute and I just think what I was just about to say to you next, there is a technology going on in my head. If I add two numbers together in my head, there's a technology going on in my head. And then, of course, the role that I play in enacting any number of technologies, including the technology of writing on paper, the technology of using this Zoom piece of stuff, the Keynote application that I'm using to do that, the things that I use to put the Keynote application together. I am playing a very significant role in the enactment of the technology. I'm part of the process of that technology. The way that it is presented, it's using lots of technologies, but the one that matters is the one that I'm using right now. And it's slightly different to the one that you're receiving right now. And you're using many different technologies to interpret what I'm saying, and you've got other signals coming in which are really important. And so technologies are part us, and we are part technology, and that space where we overlap is conventionally known as technique. It is the way in which we do something, or the methods by which we do something. So a person plus screwdriver equals, well, what indeed does it equal? Let me just say that we're participants in this. We're not just users of technologies. We're participants in them. But that screwdriver, that's interesting. So I'd like you to make use of the chat. And if you are in that classroom, to chat with the other people in that classroom about what could you do with that? That is supposed to be a screwdriver. And I'd like you to come up with some suggestions, ideally suggestions that would help somebody to learn. How could a screwdriver help somebody to learn? Type in suggestions in the chat, or chat about it with somebody else, whoever is there. Maybe we'll give a very quick summary of what people came up with. Don't be scared, don't be shy. Point to something on a whiteboard. Excellent example. I like that one very much. Why don't I have a screwdriver? I'm very unprepared. I should have a screwdriver with me. I do have I do have one attached to this bicycle implement. So this is my screwdriver. Yes, point to something on a whiteboard. It uses a drumstick. Teaching somebody to play the drums, great idea. Let me just do that. Pierce through foil. Yeah, absolutely. It's pierce any number of things. Open jars, unscrew a screw or screw a screw. Yes, there is a purpose. Make a craft with it. Drawing in the sand. I like that one. That's a very nice one. Ant retrieval tool to collect protein. Whoa, that's I've not heard that one before. I like that. Those who are in a classroom together, just anybody want to report back very quickly any other ideas that came up there? Keep on typing them in. It's all fascinating. Scratch the wall, make a hole. Making holes, that's a thing. There's a lot of hole going on here. So I mean, when you're making a hole with a screwdriver, you're orchestrating quite similar phenomena about the screwdriver and something about the material that you're trying to make a hole in. It has to be thin enough. But it's a different technology because it's being put to a different use. It's doing different stuff. So you're organizing in the same way, much of the same stuff, but you're doing different stuff with it. And this is something about the nature of technologies in general, is that what you do with them is the technology that matters. And we have a very bad tendency in the field of learning technologies and education in general to, I couldn't tell you the number of papers I've read about the effects of computers on learning. I mean, the computers are pretty much the most flexible technologies we have ever created. They can become anything. That is their primary characteristic. That's the thing that we measure. Oh, measuring an object? How many screwdrivers? Excellent. I like that. And the wand is brilliant. Yes, let's do magic together, folks. But it's not about the computer. It's about all of the other technologies that we orchestrate with it. And there's in fact, I'm pretty sure there's an actual infinite number of different things we could do with that. And this is an important thing to know. So there is what Baker calls an interpretive flexibility in all technologies. Even a nuclear reactor can be used to dry your clothes on. It doesn't, there's lots of other ways it can be used apart from the obvious ones. A gun could be used as an ornament or a doorstep, although it's more likely probably to be used to kill something. This is an important thing. So what we're adding in when we're doing this is technique. We're adding different methods, different ways of doing things, different purposes. And technique is how we do it. It is a technology that is enacted by a human. It's the part that we play in a technology. Scratching your back. That's an old favorite. I like that one. Writing on a rock. I love this. Just keep them coming. This is great. And there are different kinds of technique that I have, at least I divide them into different kinds. This is really where my major contribution starts to come into this. There's hard technique, and by hard I mean rigid and inflexible, where it means that we must play our roles within a technology in order for the technology to do what the technology does. They're things that must be done correctly or should be done as correctly as possible. If I can actually show the scribble that I wrote, that is not as correctly as possible. That is really bad. It doesn't really work as writing because I didn't follow the rules. I didn't create letters that you could read. And therefore it's the hard part of the technique has been done very badly. However, the soft part, the part that I played, the inventive role, the thing that is unique and idiosyncratic and that nobody in the entire history of the universe has ever made those marks on paper before. That is the stuff where we are doing the orchestration, where we are taking these various other technologies, putting them together, synthesizing them into something else. And we can do those things in many different ways, typically. But there's no ultimately correct way of doing it. Even Leonardo da Vinci probably looked at the Mona Lisa and thought, could have done with a little bit more just paint around the corner there. You know, there is, and you know, it might be the most famous painting in the world and rightly revered, but it would be crazy to say it's the best it could possibly be. So softness is something that's very innately human. And we typically need to know the hard stuff in order to do the soft stuff. I have a keyboard sitting here in the background, which you probably won't be able to hear, and which I cannot play very well. It makes a noise, but I haven't got a lot of that hard technique. I need a bit more of it. But having a lot doesn't necessarily mean that what you're producing is anything lesser or greater than something produced with a lot of hard technique. It's just different. And we'll see that again coming up in a couple of different places. We learn to do in order to learn to be. So education, amongst many, many other things, there's a slide that I deleted that is just full of different things that education does, from being a means to mind children and enable people to go to work, to a means to supply employers and so on and so forth. But at its core, its essence is that it is a technology, and by that I mean a massive, massive, massive assembly of many technologies for developing the techniques that we need to participate in the technologies of our cultures and societies. So essentially, when we look at things like literacies, it's very, very obvious that it takes an awfully long time to learn how to do things with written words, especially. So but almost all the things we do contain hard elements. You know, if you're doing a course on literature or fine art, you're still learning a number of hard techniques. You know, how to do citation, how to use different pigments, and so on and so forth, color theory, in order to do the soft stuff, the creative stuff. And I can hear myself echoing somewhere. So if somebody's got their microphone on, thank you. Oh, still a bit of an echo. Okay, so, and of course, there are many teachers. It's not just about the people who deliberately teach within an education system. Education systems themselves teach. And that includes the buildings, that includes the rules, the regulations, the exam boards, the people who design the curricula, the people who write textbooks, the designers of classrooms, the people who are flying kites out in the playground, and of course, other learners, and above all, the individual learner is the most important teacher in any learning and teaching transaction. Okay, this is where we move on to something where it becomes kind of significant to know these things. So let me just flip back to that slide. When we teach, there are things that we intend to teach. And typically we can describe those using learning outcomes. And typically, if you've got your constructive alignment beautifully figured out, you can also assess the effectiveness of whether you've learned those outcomes. And this is the stuff that education is increasingly and most notably considered to be about. And I mean, there are governments who frankly appall me, who see the purpose of education as being to provide fodder for industry, but really it's they see it as being something where people learn how to do stuff and people get credentials that they can use in order, as a kind of currency, in order to get jobs that they want, or at least that they're able to do. On the other side, there is what we teach. And when I say we, I mean all of the we's. So all of the textbook authors, the graphic designers who did the pictures in the creators of the computers and the software that runs upon them, whatever is involved in this. And it's always a massive, massive, massive amount of stuff. There's the stuff that we teach without meaning to teach. There are ways of seeing, attitudes, values, our relationships to other people. We discover motivation through this process, the love of learning, the ability not just to learn more, but to love to do so. We learn ways of thinking and of course, ways of being. So I would argue that this role for education is considerably more important than, or at least it's the rest of what it does simply supports that. So yeah, we need to know how to do stuff. We need to know how to speak English or perform a titration in chemistry or whatever it happens to be. But we do that in order to join the cultures, to become part of this good, helpful, kind members of our societies, ideally. So education is not just about giving a bunch of individuals a bunch of skills that are going to get them jobs. It's about making society a good place for everybody and about spreading knowledge, creating knowledge, socialization in whatever subset of culture it is. So there's socialization in the field of English literary culture and the Enlightenment, and there is socialization in the field of JavaScript programming. It's all quite specific to the cultures and communities we become parts of. So I hope you agree that this is a pretty important role for education, at least. And it's something which we kind of do. In-person teachers have always done this kind of unintentionally. Those of us who teach online usually have to think a little bit more about it and find ways of doing it slightly more mindfully. But to be honest, a great many, my role as Associate Dean Learning and Assessment, one of the missions that I'm on is to stop people saying, I've got this new course I want to develop. It's about this and this and this and this, and these are the learning outcomes. I would want to start with these are the kinds of people that are going to like this and come out of this at the end of this, and this is how they're going to learn stuff. So sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. It's late at night. I'll go off on tangents, and I apologize for the many tangents that I will go off onto. Now, technologies, we've used a lot of technologies in all of this process, and they've been ones that human beings have orchestrated. Even when you've got a team of extremely boring people producing an extremely boring textbook, that in itself matters. It is the boredom that comes through matters, not in a good way. But the passion that comes through from somebody who's written stuff about that, the things that they care about, the fact that they care about it, that has been something that's always happened as a result of human beings doing it. And now we have machines that can do that kind of thing, that can orchestrate phenomena to some use, that can organize stuff to do stuff, and very specifically things like words and pictures being big ones. But my son has just started a company where they are using it to generate medicines in interesting and exotic ways. So generative AIs are inventive. They have ways of doing things. In fact, you can tell them to do things in pretty much any way you fancy. They use other technologies. And that's of great interest to a large number of teachers. Here's a set of headlines in the background about things like AI acing Torrance test, a test of originality, and other tests of creativity, top 1% for original creative thinking. ACEs bar exams in America with scores in the 90th percentile. And you've got hosts of these machines that are designed to do teaching or to support the teaching process. I've actually been really enjoying the AI Teaching Assistant Pro that is produced by Contact North here in Canada, which it's a terrific way of learning the nuts and bolts of how to write programs, for example. It can teach you anything. It uses a vaguely Socratic method, and like all Socratic methods, it's a bully. It guides the conversation and forces students to think in ways that it wants to think. But it is very much like human Socratic teachers in that way. Khan-Migo is another one. That one's arrived early last year. So there's a lot of people using AIs to do things like produce lesson plans, to produce the content for lessons, to provide personalized learning for students, and all sorts of other really good things. And it does a pretty damn good job. Here is ChatGPT Plus. I asked it to describe in 50 words the benefits of ChatGPT Plus to teachers. And this is what it came up with. And you can see things coming out of that, like being a reliable tool for administrative tasks. Now, it should be noted that I have learned on other occasions that ChatGPT sometimes generates words that suggest, if it were anything that had consciousness, that it or beliefs, which it doesn't, that it believed that administrative tasks include assessment. So there are generative AIs being used to really replace things that teachers do. And the key thing that all the people who promote this say is, well, that gives the teacher more time to focus on the student and the instruction, to do the human stuff. Yeah, we'll get to that. This is its notion of how it benefits learners: instant diverse information, clarifying complex topics, offering personalized educational support. That's Socratic method stuff. Enhances self-paced learning, and yes, curiosity, encourages. It does. It's great. I really enjoy doing that. It fosters engagement, makes learning more dynamic and adaptable to, oh, it believes in learning styles, it seems, as well. In case anyone is in any doubt about that, learning styles, kind of nonsense. And that's another talk that I can give it some time. But that doesn't mean that they're bad. They're just, it just means that that's not true. But like I said, there are many technologies that can serve useful purposes that rely entirely upon myth and falsehood, because technologies aren't false. Technologies just do stuff. So we care about whether they're useful. Anyway, sorry, that was another slight diversion there. So they're an excellent means to improve learning outcomes and educational attainment as we measure such things. I said I wouldn't mention how the flaws in the output of generative AIs, but I would draw your attention to some of those delightful words that it came up with. I love creative geology, and reduce administration work for teachers. It has some great ideas. But as we measure such things, it's actually really good at improving learning outcomes, and it's going to get better and better and better. Very, very quickly, very, very soon. Let's make no mistake about that. If we're looking at the effects on learning outcomes as measured by the assessments that we typically use to measure those outcomes, generative AIs are really good and much better than average teachers. And generative AIs can indeed be great teachers. I have been learning a huge amount from working with ChatGPT Plus over the last few weeks on writing a bit of code, and in the process I've learned to be a much better coder in the particular framework that I was coding in, as we measure such things. And again, it's important to think about how this is being measured within our educational systems. So it's very tempting to say that if it walks like a duck, it squawks like a duck. I can't think what else ducks do, flies like a duck. Then let's just call it a duck. It's pretty much, why not just treat it as a teacher and think, this is great, it's really cheap, it's really fast, it never gets tired. Wonderful thing. Well, McNamara's fallacy. There he is again, good old Robert, the cause of many deaths and destruction and suffering in the 1960s. And also largely because of this thing about looking at the things that we measure. So as we measure such things, the teachers will get great evaluations and the students will get great grades. But that, as I suggested earlier, is not the big thing that matters about education. Education is about being human, becoming human in the company of other humans. And ChatGPT is not human. ChatGPT doesn't have to empty the cat litter tray. Horrible task. I hate doing that one. ChatGPT, no one's going to pay $5 million for that. This is Mahler's Second Symphony. Somebody paid $5 million for the original manuscript of that. And it's not even things that people have created that they'll pay money for. The fact that somebody's just used it, that's John Lennon's Gibson J160E guitar, which is a mass-produced guitar, nothing particularly special, better than any that I have, probably, but not great. $2.4 million because it was used by John Lennon to write some songs that we might have heard of. Here are two pictures. The one is Grandpa with pomegranates in his eyes, which the title was by my then 3-year-old grandchild. And the picture that my grandchild drew is on the right. Now it matters that my grandchild drew that. It matters that I can see it's part of his life history and he's part of my life history. It's a relationship between me and the artist. Now that happens to be a very direct one, but the same is true for all human creations, from the most dry textbook to the most inspiring talk that you've ever heard on Zoom in your life. It's not about the stuff that we're doing, it is about the way we're doing it. And the things that matter are the things that are human. And a question for you. We've got a few minutes left here, so let's have you let's spend a couple of minutes. I don't know about you. I read stories to my children. In fact, I made up a lot of stories for my children when they were little. They're doing the same things for their children. I imagine that every single one of you was, as a child, probably experienced children's stories of one form or another. What did you learn from them? Just type in the chat, talk amongst yourselves. What was it? What was it what were you getting out of that? To be creative. I like that. Yeah. The world is a magical, fantastic place full of wonder and adventure, so much so. Listen and respond. Interesting. Empathy. Yes. Different perspectives. Don't trust strangers. Lovely. It's true. That's exactly. Enhancing imagination. Humor. The things that are funny. I can be what I like. Yes. You see the possibilities. You see different ways of being human. Manners. Exactly. Yes. And not just manners, but morals, the ethical systems that we develop. Slightly worrying, some of those ethical systems, I must say. I mean, there's the kinds of punishments that bad people get and so on. Probably not the best thing in life. And reading is important, teaches you things. Exactly so. All of these things, these are all coming through from the process of storytelling. And almost all of these are things that are to do with that having been passed on by human beings, about being the development of culture, a shared culture. Culture really important because often these things were shared. Of course, in the case of stories written by artificial intelligences, they're not. They're very personal. Apparently mean when child or a mean dragon doing angry stuff with my sweater on. Great. So what happens when we learn that sort of thing from things that are not quite human? And they are, it's important to remember that these are actually quite human. I mean, because 90% or more of what they're doing is done by human beings. They're just pulling stuff together, averaging it out, thinking what you're using that to generate other stuff. But it's fundamentally human stuff. Well, I think that this is kind of bad. There's another portrait of ChatGPT by ChatGPT. I think it's kind of bad because these things have no identity. They don't have relationships with us. And if they do, I find that concerning. They don't have any values of their own. You can tell them to have whatever values you like. No passion, no beliefs. Ask them to believe something, they'll write something that suggests they do. No life history and no intention. They don't have any skin in the game. They're not human. And they're not human in both good and bad ways. Some of the things that are really quite nice about them are that they are very, very patient. They never give up. They're also kind of annoying when they get things wrong because they keep not giving up and they keep doing the wrong things. But they're there at any time, and they can impersonate. And indeed, there are many systems that have been designed that are specifically to form relationships with people. Okay, I am being a little bit of an old fogey here, but this is kind of worries me because what people are learning is not what it is to be human. It's something slightly different, and these generative pre-trained transformers and other kinds of generative AIs are trained on the signals that we mostly intentionally produced, but they don't signify anything to them. They don't mean anything to them. They are second-hand symbols. And I think this really doesn't scale well, because right now, generative AIs enhance and automate what we currently do, and that's great. I'm enjoying that, and they help us to meet the measurable goals that we are supposed to meet. If you have to inject a load of content into a whole bunch of students' heads within a fixed time frame, assess them on it, and prove that they have achieved those learning outcomes, great. It will do it fast. You can produce a dozen courses in a week, and they will work. But we come to this having already learned all of this stuff. We learn from other human beings. That was exclusively the way we learned. Sometimes they were committees and they were machine-like, but they were human beings. And we have habits of learning and ways of doing things that have been learned in the company of other human beings. Right now, generative AIs supplement our teaching, but only rarely do they replace it. This is going to change simply because these things are becoming much smarter. They're already extremely good. They are much, much cheaper. They're much more available. They increase accessibility for a vast range of people from all across the globe. And yes, there's a whole host of issues like the cultural assumptions and presuppositions that they throw in, the biases that they embody. That's not the thing that bothers me at this point. What bothers me is the scale at which they will be doing it. This will be predominantly the way that a significant chunk of the world's population is going to be learning from now on. And we will think that they've done a great job, because if we're thinking of learning as the stuff the proxy stuff, the grades, the credentials, the things that achieve the results for employers, it will do that. That's what's going to happen. And it will magnify that and magnify that and magnify that, and it will get better and better. We will be able to do the hard stuff. But the soft stuff, that's the stuff that in those of us who already have these skills, those skills will atrophy. Already, I'm finding it easier to these pictures. I used to go and look all over the Creative Commons and public domain pictures in order to find relevant ones that fitted with what I wanted to do. Now I just say, please would you do an apocalyptic line drawing representing the domination of machines over a crowd of people, and something like that. And that's what will come up. So these skills are skills that children who are exposed to this, and remember, these things are being used for children's stories, that will not be learning some of this stuff. Some of this stuff will be being passed across. And yeah, sure, that's fine. I mean, I feel a bit like Socrates saying, you know, oh, this invention of yours, writing, it will provide the semblance of memory. And, you know, but it's not like that, because what that was doing was augmenting our ability to do things. This stuff is doing it itself. And there's a lot of meaning in the stuff that it generates. It doesn't come from a human being. It doesn't make stupid mistakes like human beings. It makes stupid mistakes, but not like human beings. So we'll be learning ways of being from these things that are not quite human in the sense that we have known them up until now. And the machines themselves are going to be producing some slightly less human stuff because they're going to be trained on the outputs of other machines. Of course, that's already happening in fast scale. And machines are going to be trained, if not, on the output of people who have been trained by machines. Now, I see this as being a fairly disastrous thing, and I want to, and I think we need to find some ways of evading it. Maybe it will be fine. I mean, and I am painting a deliberately over-bleak and slightly biased picture here, because obviously there will be ways in which we use these things creatively. I'd like to think that you're looking at one or two of them now. You've seen some examples of, you know, this is also a new medium, but it is something that replaces human teachers, and those soft roles, the tacit curriculum. It's not just a hidden curriculum; it's an unsaid and unsayable curriculum. The stuff that is about how we become the people we are, that's the stuff that is bothering me. So how do we avoid it? And how do we valorize what it is to be human? How do we recover that thing that is education? Well, I think it's something that I can and might one day write a book about, but I'm going to focus on four main things. I like that. Yes, very nice. I don't. Sorry, I don't think I can actually replace teachers because it can't replace a hug. No, it can't. In fairness, I've never hugged any of my students at Athabasca University. I've met probably only 4 or 5 of them in person. I might have shaken their hands. Generative AIs with separate non-overlapping roles. I'll talk about each of these in turn. And generative AIs to support human connection, and ways of rethinking education as community rather than as a product that we provide, that a measurable product. So I think really importantly, if we're going to use these things effectively, they should not replace us. They should work with us. We should really, I've heard many people saying, oh, they're just tools. That is nonsense. They are not just tools. They don't work the same way that other human tools work. They are partners. They are team members. We could contract work out to them. I pay my $20-something a month, and ChatGPT Plus will produce the pictures for my slide decks. That's very, very good value. It's a lot cheaper than getting somebody else to do it. I can't do it myself, and I will never learn. Really bad idea, though, of course, if you happen to be a child and doing this, and you're not learning the skills that go along with it, because drawing has many cognitive benefits, and it's an important part of how we communicate with others, even if we're not actually scribbling on a piece of paper and saying, look, I mean this. It's there in the ways in which we think. So I think really quite important to keep those roles as separate as possible. Providing supports for human connection. I think the many AI systems can be really good at helping the conversation along. You know, they can, in a simple, obvious example, I don't know whether Zoom does it. Certainly a fair number of these webinar systems do it. They will provide you with a summary of what was spoken about afterwards. They can do that during as well. They can organize discussion threads. They can act as matchmakers. There's a what's it called, Jill Watson. That was one of Jill Watson's roles. An early bot using generative AI technology that would connect students together or look for those who are maybe having difficulty and so on and so forth. So supports for human connection, thinking of them as things that in this sense actually are more tool-like, but they're more like matchmakers. They're people who run dating agencies than or facilitators of conversation. Again, quite human-like. Thinking about the stuff, the ways in which we value education. And I think really importantly, reclaiming that social aspect of it. This is not news. This is, you know, Dewey was saying this 120 years ago. And we've been saying it ever since, you know, that education is about being a member of your society, of your networks, of your groups, of the sets of people who share interests and so on, being part of your community. So focusing, I think, on thinking, you know, because we're not going to be much use compared with a generative AI if somebody wants to, say, learn JavaScript programming. Frankly, you can already do it much, much better with the aid of any number of things, Copilot, Bing, Bard, whatever you happen to be using. There's lots of really good ways of learning the hard skills, but of learning what it means to be a programmer. What it means to be part of a programming community, learning the things that matter to people. And I've always taught, as somebody who does teach a bit of programming, you know, that it's about understanding what people want to do and being able to translate that into something. It's about people. So the reclaiming the social seems important, and revaluing the human fingerprints and traces and things. I see one of the things that makes me feel less despairing about what might happen is that as we suffer this deluge of stuff that's generated by artificial intelligences, that we will value the human more, that it will matter. You know, that my grandchild's drawing will be seen as having greater value because it would be rarer. And finally, I think with refocusing education on where it kind of should have been focused in the first place, which is that the things that matter are with whom you do it, where you do it, why you do it, and in what way you do it. It's not just about the what you do and the how you do it. It's not just about the methods and the thing that you're doing. And it's about growth. It's about personal growth, about social growth, about community growth. It's about connection with other people and the ways in which we connect with the things that we are learning from. All of those technologies are links to other human beings. It's about meaning, things that are becoming meaningful to us and realizing the meaning that others feel in things. And it's about value. And it's not the grades and credentials, because frankly, we're in an arms race if we think that we're going to somehow be effectively judging human beings in this, because we never have been. I mean, we've always been judging the combination of human beings with other human beings, with other technologies that they're using, with the things that are in their heads, with the things that are outside their heads. Our minds have always been extended into the world. It's just that now there are other minds in there as well, and they're really tireless, quick, and easy, and cheap. So thinking about what education itself should mean is where I'd like to finish with this. And I have totally messed up the time because there's only 2 minutes left, but you did say we might have a few minutes more, Mark, for talking, because I really want to talk and I have really enjoyed some of the chats that I've seen. So let's go with it. And I did write a paper on some of this stuff a while back. There's a link. I did write a book about the theory behind all of this. And it's free to read and download. And somebody created a Beats version of it. There's a musical version of it with a robot voice, which I really like. Anyway, sorry, over to you. I've talked way too much. I've done all the bad things that teachers should never do, and that's nonsense too, because it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And so lectures are okay. There's a reason for lectures. Just not if you expect to learn the facts that are being presented in the lecture. That doesn't do a thing. Pretty useless for that. Anyway, sorry, over to you. Let me increase the size of the chat window so that I can see what you are writing.
Okay, yeah, John, thank you so much. And yeah, I wish we did have longer, because really interesting. And I'm sure there's lots of things. If we go right back to even just the ideas of what technologies are, the hard and soft aspects of that, and then into the whole area of what can and cannot be done with generative AI and exactly what it is. So what I want to do is just open this up to questions, to comments. For those online, please raise your hand, and I will try and kind of mediate that. And there's some nice comments coming in. You can also just put your question into the chat. So if you don't want to unmute and speak by raising your hand, then please just put the question in chat and we'll pick it up there.
Sorry, shall I answer the first question that's come up in the chat, or shall
yes, please. Go ahead.
Should we hear a voice? Which is, do I see the metaverse as a technology or tool? Oh, it's technology and tools, and many tools. Tools are not all tools are technologies in the sense that they become a tool because of the technique that we add to them. A tool is something that is used by somebody in order to make a technology happen. So, a stick lying on the ground is not a technology. As soon as you pick it up, it can become a tool for prodding things or doing the things that we were talking about with screwdrivers. Let's have a spoken.
Yeah, Margarita, do you want to go first, and then Matthew? Margarita followed by Matthew.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, John. Thank you for such an insightful presentation. I read in one of your articles on your website that you actually compare not using generative AI to not using writing. So it's here to stay for sure. So I have two questions. What is the most important thing, in your opinion, for educators to do right now at this point of time, as we move forward in terms of generative AI? If you could give one thing.
Play with it. I think we are all in fact, some of us who've been working in it for years are more ignorant than the people who are coming to it afresh, because we see it as an outgrowth. We see it as a tool. We see it as a simple progression. I understand the basics of how it works. I mean, I couldn't write a generative AI system, but I get the basic principles. And so it doesn't seem as magical or disruptive, and it is. And it matters that we understand that sometimes it feels like a friend, but it is an enemy, and sometimes it really is a friend. And that's a lived experience thing. I think it's about being able to see the problems, but also being able to see the fact that this is something that is a part of our lives and will remain so. And it is a really important part. It will be very different important parts. So any details you learn now are irrelevant. um, there's no such thing as AI literacy. I have so many colleagues wanting to produce AI literacy courses. Nonsense. I mean, there's just a bunch of skills in using the current thing. These technologies will change far too fast for us to describe ourselves as literate in them. What we will be able to do is to use them and to reflect upon using them and to talk about using them with other people, you know, and that's what it's about. That's do the human thing with them.
Thank you, Dron. If I may just follow up with a little question. I don't know if it can be, if it's actually little or not, but you mentioned that generative AI creates stories for kids, right? So yeah. If then it's a story created by generative AI, but then if a teacher, an educator, a parent takes that story and tells it to the child, interpreting, of course, making it like kind of you know, letting it go through the person, is it then still considered artificial intelligence, or is it human intelligence, in your opinion?
It depends how much the human adds. Of course, like all technologies, it's a bit of both. You know, there's always that soft part that humans will add when they do that. But what that there is now the soft part that the machines will add. In the past, it would just have been mechanical, but it's no longer mechanical. I did think, I wondered about this example, and I thought, you know, what would I do with a generated story if I were telling it to my own kids? I would rewrite it. But that makes it feel like it's an okay thing. Then you've had a partner, you're acting as the editor and maybe the critic and turning it into something else, and that starts to feel nice. Except that, again, this sort of thing is happening at scale, and there is something very important about the process of story generation that may have been lost in the process. On the other hand, you may have gained a lot from writing the prompt. I learn a lot about what I think by writing prompts. So it's complicated. I think the big thing is just don't treat it as a tool producing stuff. Treat it as a partner and do the human thing with it. And yes, that's a much better way of thinking about it, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go to Matt, who kind of represents the people on campus. Over to you, Matt.
Hi, Matt, and people on campus.
Hi. Hi, this is actually Brody.
Okay. Hi, Brody.
Hi. I am just wondering, you know, I think as you pointed out with McNamara's fallacy, I think there's dangerous positivist assumptions with AI, and I'm wondering how you see non-positivist belief systems or knowledge systems. For instance, I work in Indigenous education. I work in the Squamish community in Squamish, just north up Highway 99 from you, and I'm wondering how you see what role you see non-positivist knowledge systems playing in maybe being an antidote to, or you know, just lending themselves to a healthier world where AI looms large.
I like that, and I should have mentioned that I'm coming to you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Tooth, who these things really do matter, and that is about our relationships to one another, our relationships to the land, our relationships to place, and the ways in which we feel about that. I don't think that it's an alternative to measurement. I think that we need to accept that any measurements that we do make use of are at most a proxy for something. They don't, and they're not likely to measure the most important things. So other ways of telling stories about what is happening, about our experience of the world and so on, I think are very, very important. I do think that there's a place for both. You know, there's a lot of quite cool things that have happened as a result of the objectivist approach to things, and there are a lot of really stupid things that have happened as a result of more subjectivist approaches to things. I think we need to look at things from a complexivist perspective. We need to understand that there are things that are we and the world are just really, really complex things. That sounds so stoned, doesn't it? And there's actually a lot more about that within the book, and that explains a little bit of the ways in which emergent things happen within complex systems, where patterns develop, where different ways of seeing, where phase transitions occur, where and where the ways in which we shape our understanding of such things are important. And so, yes, I'm really good with indigenous ways of knowing. I don't think they're the only ways. But I think it's really very, very helpful to be able to see that world and to understand things through other people's eyes. So yeah, and there are some very interesting uses of AIs in, for example, in preserving some indigenous languages, and the kinds of training sets that they're trained on, I guess, are also preserving something, but it's a distorted something of the culture that they are trained, the stuff, the signals that they are trained upon. This is stuff that we have been doing to colonized cultures for the last few centuries, is now being done to us by artificial intelligence. So yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. I'm going to go to Mike now. Hi, Mike. You got your hand raised? Hi, Mike. Can't hear you at the moment. You're showing us unmuted, but we can't.
There we go. There we go. Thanks, John. Very enjoyable lecture. I'm talking to you as headmaster of a school for 3-year-olds up to 18-year-olds. And I just want to pick you up on one of the comments that you said, and that was you use ChatGPT Plus to add the animations, drawings, whatever it is, into your slide decks, but you wouldn't want a child to be doing that because there's important skills they're learning for drawing. What age do you think that we, as educators, should be giving pupils access to this generative AI?
About 2. My grandchild, who is going to be 7 in a couple of weeks' time, they've been using various variants on themes like DALL-E and Midjourney and so on to produce pictures for some time. They produce the most wonderful pictures, and it's really rewarding for them. They really like it, and it's a very creative activity. There's a dialogic process involved where they learn more as a result of the things that are produced, and in the process they're learning to think about how to express themselves in different kinds of ways. So absolutely let kids play with these things. I would never say don't let kids play with stuff just because they're a certain age, or like is it the Steiner schools, where there's the distance between lip and nose. Anyway, you know, there's no, I mean, it's always personal. It's always something about the individual and when it's right for them. I think what really matters, of course, is not losing the skills that go along with that. My grandchild is able to draw. You just saw one of their drawings from the age of 3. They do it a little bit better nowadays, and the thing that bothers me is is only when it replaces, not when it augments. And we need to find ways of working with our robot friends. And maybe we shouldn't think of them as friends, but we do need to think of them as partners and we do need to make sure that there is a very clear separation between what makes us other people valuable and what value they bring to us and our societies. Not sorry, that sounds a little vague. Well, it is after midnight, but it's, have I made the distinction moderately clear, or do I need to explain that a little bit more? I think it's absolutely fine for kids to play with this sort of stuff, as long as it doesn't nudge out the other sort of stuff. It's more than fine.
Okay,
formalizing it, not so good.
Sorry to cut in there. I've just checked with Alana that she doesn't mind starting her session later. So we'll continue with questions for now, but everybody will still get a break between the end of this and Alana's session, okay? But I see the hand up from Matt, which I'll go to in a second. But I also just wanted to pick up on the chat a comment made by Devon, who was really pleased that you mentioned McNamara and Goodhart's Law, and so was I have to admit, and I want to pick up on that. In my decades in education, what I've observed is just an increasing focus on, well, they're now even in my institution called KPIs, these signals, a metric, and they don't very often even tell people what they're claiming they tell them, but they are easy to measure. And we can see how they progress year by year. And if they get better, then everybody says we're doing a good job. So like Devon, this is an area of concern. And I think, as you say, linking that with generative AI, we can have a problem. In fact, the paper, I'm going to plug one of my papers now, the Pseudo University is ultimately about that. The short vignette of speculative fiction is about the idea of students and teachers just using generative AI to meet key performance indicators. But now I want to go over to Matt or whoever is in the class who wants to ask a question, having got my plug in.
Thanks, Mark. This is Avi from the room. And also, John, thank you very much for all your presentation. I have one comment, which is more on the practical side, especially the last slides, or towards the last, when you were mentioning about refocusing and not just on grades and credentials. Of course, like we as budding educators and trying to understand and live with or try to foster this generative AI or AI in education. But most of our education policies and practices, especially in our schools and universities, still value grades and credentials. So how do you see in near future, or when do you see it will happen that we will be able to use our knowledge and our freedom to teach or to foster learning and not focus on grades and credentials? So when do you think that will blink first, the education policy or the teachers, or I don't know if I put it right? Yeah, thanks.
I understand exactly. Yes, and it's of course everything is recursive and everything feeds into everything else, so everything kind of changes at the same time. I think that we will probably. One of the things that I like about all of the discussion that has been going on about generative AIs has been the renewed focus on how we know whether anyone has been learning. There's a lot of knee-jerk reaction to that, which is let's go back to proctored exams, invigilated exams, where people are overseen by other people and they write with pens. That's not the good way around it. But the good way, I think, it's encouraged people to think about, well, okay, what does matter? It's about visibility, not of product. It's not about the measurable product. It's about the story of the process. It's about the visibility of the learner. And the fact that is of necessity, given that in the space of a couple of months, the half of the assessments, the credential assessments being provided in the world suddenly became pretty much useless. The fact that is encouraged us to think about that, I think, is a really good thing. I see it's only really going, that focus is only really going to happen if we're able to decouple teaching and credential. I think that at the moment, the system is so much driven by those credentials. And that goes back to Goodhart's law, that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. It's really difficult to get away from the extrinsic motivation that drives a great deal of education, and the horrific focus on grades and judging people rather than helping people to learn. I don't think we'll ever really get rid of that until we find ways of decoupling. And there are some good examples of this. Brunel University has this really nice system. In the UK, they have learning modules and assessment modules. A module is what's referred to as a course in this country, or a unit in Australia, or a paper in New Zealand, or whatever you want to call it. It's a chunk of stuff, and in the learning modules there is no grading, there is no credential, there's no assessment whatsoever. And in the assessment modules that follow, it's still a powerful learning experience, and what they're doing is synthesizing and pulling together the stuff from the learning modules in order to do something genuinely useful. So it's a way of it's one of many ways we have of decoupling credentials and teaching. It doesn't completely get rid of it. We still have to deal with that credentialing issue somewhere down the line. And I think, that is something which is being driven from so far outside education. I mean, education is the small and fast moving thing in this. There's this big social stuff on which it depends that will take a really long time to disappear. But in the meantime, I think that there is a lot we can do just to slightly reinvent the ways in which we do this.
John, thank you so much for your talk. I know it's 20 past midnight in Vancouver. So really grateful for your time, giving up time in the middle of the night for us. I know, I've seen in the chat, and I know some direct messages, people have really valued this. So thank you so much indeed. I'm going to be in touch with you after this, because I have a talk with many of the people in the room, a course with many of the people in the room starting in March. The course is actually called Technology Enhanced Learning. And I'm sure quite a lot of them would welcome perhaps the opportunity of an open chat with you if you have time and space available, and we can make a suitable time that works for both. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot to agree to that. Honestly,
you can tell that I'm kind of passionate and enthusiastic about this stuff, and that's why it doesn't matter quite as much that I'm been lecturing at you, rather than having a conversation with you. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, I like these people. These are nice people you have here. Thank you, people, for coming along.
They really are. John, thank you so much. We're now going to take a break before Elena's session. So we'll start, let's say at 10:35 to give people enough time to go to bathrooms, boil a cup of tea or coffee or whatever. So we'll come back with Elena's presentation at 10:35. But thank you so much, everybody, for this. I have recorded it, and I'll let everybody know the recording link once all the processing has been done. If you don't hear from me, drop me an email, everybody. All right? Okay. Thanks, John.
And I apologize for missing the next session, but I think I have an 8:30 meeting where I have to present something. So I shall wish you well. And thank you so much for being a lovely audience. And thanks for all of the exciting ideas. I hope that I can see this recording and pick up on some of those. And if you want to drop me an email, I will share these slides. They won't appear immediately because I'm going to bed, but they will appear within the next day. And the links and things, you can find all of those there. I'm Jon Dron, Jondron, on almost everything, any kind of social media. That's more or less where you'll find me. Or jondron.ca is my website. Find me from there. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Good morning. Enjoy the rest.